The fluorescent lights of Newark Tower flickered as Director Marcus Webb stood in front of veteran controller Daniel Ross's station, termination letter in hand. "You're done here, Ross. 32 years, and you can't even keep up with basic protocols anymore." His voice cut through the hum of the control room like a blade. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he removed his headset, not from fear, but from the weight of being called incompetent in front of colleagues who'd trusted him with thousands of lives. The younger controllers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes fixed on their screens, as their mentor was escorted toward the exit. Marcus had been gunning for this moment for months. Daniel represented everything the new director despised: old systems, traditional methods, instinct over automation. "The tower needs efficiency, not dinosaurs," Marcus had told the regional supervisor. He wanted controllers who followed the new AI-assisted protocols without question, who trusted the computers more than their gut. Daniel's tendency to override the system based on weather patterns he could feel before they showed on radar had become an embarrassment to Marcus's vision of a modern, streamlined operation. But as Daniel's security badge was deactivated and he walked past the break room for the last time, two blips appeared on the main radar screen. Flight 447 from Boston and Flight 923 from Atlanta, both 737s carrying over 300 souls combined, were on a direct collision course. The new automated system had failed to flag the conflict, and Marcus, standing victoriously in the center of his pristine control room, suddenly realized he'd just fired the only person in the building who could read the chaos unfolding in the sky above them. The clock read 2:47 p.m. In 5 minutes, two planes would occupy the same piece of airspace at 31,000 feet. Daniel was halfway to the parking lot when he heard the alarm, a sound he'd heard 1,000 times in 3 decades, but never after being fired. His body moved before his mind could process it, years of conditioning overriding the sting of humiliation. Through the glass doors, he could see the pandemonium erupting inside the tower. Controllers were shouting coordinates, their voices climbing in pitch with each passing second. Marcus stood frozen at the center console, his face drained of color, stabbing frantically at buttons that should have activated the collision avoidance protocols. The automated system had crashed at the worst possible moment, its screen displaying nothing but an ominous blue loading circle. Daniel's fingers instinctively reached for the badge that was no longer clipped to his belt. Flight 447 was descending through a pressure system from the north. He knew that route like the back of his hand, had guided hundreds of planes through those exact coordinates during storm season. Flight 923 would be climbing to cruise altitude from the south, and if the pilots were following standard procedure in that sector, they'd be blind to each other for another 90 seconds. The math was brutal and simple. 2 aircraft, same altitude, converging at a combined speed of over 1,000 miles per hour. At this distance, even if both pilots saw each other on their collision avoidance systems right now, they wouldn't have enough time to react. Inside, Marcus finally looked up from the useless console and his eyes found Daniel through the glass. For a split second, pride and desperation fought across the director's face. He'd just destroyed this man's career, humiliated him publicly, stripped away his dignity. But 347 people were about to die, and Marcus knew, everyone in that room knew, there was only one person who could thread the needle without the computer's help. Marcus's hand moved to the door release button. The question burning in everyone's mind wasn't whether Daniel could save them, it was whether he would. If this story reminds you that experience and wisdom can never be replaced by systems alone, consider subscribing to join our Kindness Pure family. Because sometimes, the greatest strength is knowing when to trust the human heart. The door buzzed open, and Daniel stepped back into the tower that had just cast him out. No one spoke. Marcus moved aside without a word, and Daniel took his old position at the console like a pianist returning to a familiar instrument. His fingers flew across the backup manual controls, bypassing the frozen automation entirely. Flight 447 Newark Tower, immediate descent to flight level 280, reduce speed to 250 knots. His voice was steady, calm, carrying none of the emotion churning beneath the surface. The pilot's response crackled back instantly. Newark Tower, 447, descending 280, reducing speed. They trusted him completely, no questions asked. That's what 32 years of reputation bought you. But Daniel knew one adjustment wouldn't be enough. The planes were too close, their momentum too great. He pulled up the wind data on the secondary screen, his eyes scanning numbers that told him what the automated system had missed. A 40-knot crosswind at 30,000 feet, pushing from the northwest. Flight 923 would be fighting that wind, their actual ground track drifting slightly east of their filed flight plan. Flight 923 Newark Tower, turn left heading 180 immediately, maintain flight level 290. The pause before the pilot responded felt like an eternity. Newark Tower, 923, left 180. Is everything all right up there? Daniel closed his eyes for just a moment. Just trust me on this one, 923. I need you to make that turn now. The radar screen showed the two blips beginning to separate, but they were still dangerously close. Less than 3 miles horizontally, only 1,000 feet vertically. In the air traffic control world, that was barely breathing room. Daniel's hands moved to adjust Flight 447 again, his mind calculating approach angles and closure rates faster than any computer could process. He'd built these calculations into his neural pathways over thousands of hours, in every weather condition, with every type of aircraft. Marcus watched from behind, finally understanding what he'd almost destroyed. Not just a career, but an entire living database of knowledge that couldn't be programmed or downloaded. The junior controller beside Daniel whispered the closure rate. 2.3 miles, rate decreasing. Every eye in the tower was locked on the radar screen, watching 2 green blips that represented hundreds of innocent people who had no idea how close they'd just come. Daniel made one final adjustment to Flight 447's heading, his voice still carrying that same unshakable calm. Flight 447, turn right, heading 045. Resume normal navigation when clear of traffic. The blip turned, and the gap widened to 5 miles, then 7. The crisis point had passed, but Daniel's heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The tower remained silent for a moment after the danger passed, a collective exhale of relief rippling through the room. Daniel's hands were still on the controls, his eyes fixed on the screen as he watched both flights continue safely to their destinations. Flight 447's pilot came back over the frequency. Newark Tower 447 here. We just got a collision alert on our system a minute ago. Thanks for the heads up. You probably saved our lives up here. Daniel's throat tightened, but his voice remained professional. Just doing the job, 447. Have a safe flight. He stepped back from the console slowly, as if emerging from a trance, and the weight of the last 10 minutes finally crashed over him. Marcus stood there, still holding the termination letter that now felt like poison in his hands. The other controllers had turned in their chairs, looking between their director and the man he'd just tried to erase from their team. One of the younger controllers, Amy Chen, spoke up first. That was incredible, Daniel. The system didn't even flag the conflict until 30 seconds before you made the first call. Her voice carried both admiration and accusation, the latter aimed squarely at Marcus. Another controller nodded. The automation has been glitching for weeks, but we were told it was being optimized. The room's attention shifted to Marcus, whose face had gone from pale to red. Daniel finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. The system is a tool, Marcus. It's a good tool when it works, but it's only as reliable as the people who know when to trust it and when to override it. He looked around at the younger controllers, his colleagues, his students. I wasn't against the new technology. I was trying to teach everyone that you can't let it make you complacent. You need to know the airspace, the weather, The aircraft performance characteristics. You need to feel it, not just read it. His words hung in the air like a sermon, and even Marcus couldn't find a rebuttal. The regional supervisor would be calling within the hour, demanding to know why the automated system had failed so catastrophically. Marcus set the termination letter down on the console, and for the first time since Daniel had known him, the director's arrogance cracked. "I made a mistake," he said quietly, the words clearly painful to form. "I thought efficiency meant removing the human variables. I thought the old ways were holding us back." He looked at Daniel directly, and there was something raw in his eyes. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement. "I didn't understand what experience actually means until I watched you work just now." Daniel picked up the letter, folded it once, and handed it back to Marcus. "Then maybe we both learned something today." The tension in the room eased slightly, but everyone knew this moment would define Marcus's leadership moving forward and Daniel's legacy long after he was gone. The investigation team from the FAA arrived the next morning, their presence casting a shadow over the entire facility. Daniel sat across from two federal inspectors in a small conference room, recounting every decision he'd made during those critical 5 minutes. They listened intently, occasionally asking technical questions about his methodology, about how he'd identified the wind shear factor that the automated system had missed. "The computer runs on algorithms based on filed flight plans and standard atmospheric models," Daniel explained, his hands gesturing as if he were still at the controls. "But weather is chaotic. That crosswind was just starting to build when the conflict developed. The system hadn't updated its calculations yet. I've seen that pattern 100 times in 30 years. The lead investigator, a woman named Patricia Reeves with 20 years of experience herself, leaned forward. "Mr. Ross, you understand we're not here to judge you. We're here to understand why the system failed and why you succeeded where it didn't." Daniel nodded slowly. The system didn't fail exactly. It just wasn't designed to handle real-time environmental variables at that processing speed. And honestly, it shouldn't have to. That's why you need experienced controllers who can think beyond the screen. Patricia glanced at her notes, then at Daniel. "We've reviewed your personnel file. We also reviewed Director Webb's termination recommendation." Her tone made it clear what she thought of that decision. "Would you like to file a formal complaint?" Daniel considered the question for a long moment. Marcus had humiliated him, questioned his competence, tried to erase 3 decades of service in a single afternoon. The old Daniel, the one from yesterday, would have been angry enough to pursue it. But the Daniel sitting in this conference room had just proved something far more valuable than winning a bureaucratic fight. "No complaint," he said finally. Marcus made a call based on what he believed was right for the tower's future. He was wrong, but his intentions weren't malicious. Sometimes the best lessons come from being wrong at exactly the right moment. Patricia raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised, but she made a note in her file. "That's remarkably gracious, Mr. Ross." What Daniel didn't say, what he was still processing himself, was that Marcus's mistake had revealed something important about the entire air traffic control system's evolution. Automation was the future, yes, but only if it was built on a foundation of human wisdom, not as a replacement for it. The FAA needed to hear that message, and now they were listening. 2 days later, Patricia called Daniel personally. "We're recommending a complete review of the automated collision avoidance protocols at all major facilities. We're also recommending that controllers with 20+ years of experience be integrated into the system design process." She paused. "And Daniel, we're recommending you specifically to head the advisory panel, if you're interested." Daniel looked out the window of his home office at the sky, where planes were drawing white lines across the blue. He smiled. "Yeah, I'm interested." Daniel returned to Newark Tower 3 weeks later, not as a fired controller, but as a senior advisor on the new automation integration project. Marcus was still director, But he'd changed, the arrogance replaced by something quieter, more thoughtful. They worked together now, bridging the gap between old wisdom and new technology, between instinct and algorithm. The younger controllers learned to trust both their screens and their mentors, understanding that the best system was one that honored both. Flight 447 and Flight 923 landed safely that day, their passengers never knowing how close they'd come to disaster. But in control towers across the country, Daniel's story spread like wildfire. A reminder that experience isn't just about years served, but about the invisible knowledge built through thousands of critical moments. The human element, it turned out, wasn't the weakness in the system. It was the heart that kept the system alive. And sometimes the greatest act of kindness is giving someone the chance to prove their worth, even after you've tried to take it away. Marcus learned that lesson 5 minutes too late, but just in time to change everything. In the end, that's what redemption looks like. Not perfection, but the courage to admit you were wrong and the wisdom to make it right.